Well, you're a bunch of brave sorts. I mean, you've heard me once and you're back for another dose. I would think by this time you think, well, you know, we could put up with this old geezer once, but having to do it twice, that sounds like a bit more than we bargained for when we came into this business. At any rate, it's good to see you here. And I don't know whether I'm supposed to be the old curmudgeon in the course or not, but what I'm going to try to bring to you today is perhaps a meditation on what human is, what a human is, and what we expect from humans, and to raise the issue that's not that far away of robots taking over some of the principal things that we do. For example, I was on a plane someplace, I don't know, New York or somewhere, and I picked up a magazine, and the magazine said, well, would you be comfortable if a machine were flying your plane? Would you accept the fact that we can now construct a robot that could control this plane better than a human? And I immediately felt uncomfortable. I mean, I thought, why should a robot be better at protecting me and getting me up and getting me down better than a human does? And then I flew into Edmonton from Fort McMurray in a storm. And of course, those of you who know anything about airplanes know that they have a homing device, and that the chap, you know, sitting up front there doesn't know where he's going. You know, he doesn't have a clue because all he sees is this white stuff coming at him, and he's got to put you on the ground. So that means he's got to go down through those clouds and down through that snow, and he's got to put you on the ground just so. Well, you know that he doesn't do that. In fact, he has a machine, he has a robot, he has a computer that calculates all of that for him and tells him precisely how to hone in on the runway, precisely when to cut the speed, precisely when to open the ailerons and do all of those kinds of things. So in effect, the plane in the worst possible situation is being flown by a robot. How much will you trust a robot with your life? And it's pretty clear that what we're into now is a point where we kind of think that machines do a better job with us, for us, than we do ourselves. And so I suppose what this class is a kind of meditation on what it means to have a human world. And what it could be like, let's say, 150, 200 years from now, when I think most of the ordinary duties that we participate in will be taken over by robots. So there are all kinds of issues that I could talk about, but I just want to bring a few to your attention, okay? And I don't think there's anything supersonic about these things. I think this is pretty well known. Kim and I have talked about Foxconn. Of course, you know that machine that you have on your desk in front of you and the one in your pocket. All of this comes out of Foxconn, right? Foxconn, you know, cranks out iPhones and iPads and all of this kind of stuff, and you know, they have made absolutely gazillions of dollars on this. So what does Foxconn say? Well, they're going to buy 1.2 million robots to do the job of the people who now make those tools that you have in front of you and in your pocket. How do you feel about that? Yeah, you like that? How many of you like that? Okay, we got 2 who like that. So, rather than getting you all up here and expressing your point of view, let me try to put some of that into perspective. You know the size of China. And you know that most of these people work for, you know, somewhere around $1 a day. Maybe $2 a day. Now, how much do you pay for a bottle of water? So I bought this and I said, you know, is this stuff going up? And she says, no, it's going down. This is only $2 today. Well, here are people, millions of people, with nothing to do because robots are going to replace them. Now, does that have nothing to say to you? So if you were living in China, instead of being born here or having immigrated here or whatever, suppose you were born there. Is that okay that you not have a job at $1 a day so that you could put a machine in to handle it? Give me a break. I wouldn't want my son or daughter to be, you know, put in the scrap heap because of a machine. So in effect, every one of these machines that we think help us and do things for us and all that has an ethical issue attached to it. And so that's why I say that the era of robots is not an environment that's not going to be costly. It's going to be costly in a number of ways. And it may be your son, your daughter, your grandson, your granddaughter that will be the recipient of it. Now, I was surprised, I think it was about 3 months ago, when some kid in a high school here sent a message, I think it was on Facebook, that he was going to kill somebody. Now, nobody local said anything about it, but where was it picked up? You remember? The CIA picked it up in Washington and sent a message back immediately to the Edmonton police. And that kid was picked up the next morning in school before he even started. Doesn't that say anything to you? Well, it says a heck of a lot to me. It says that every bloody thing I do is now not just monitored by our next door neighbor and by people down the street, but by guys in Washington that are monitoring everything, including a Facebook idiot who says, I'm going to kill you. So rather than being comforted by the notion that the Edmonton police could pick up, you know, a kid who was absolutely stupid, that scared the bejesus out of me, because that means then that just about everything I can write is being read by somebody someplace else in the world. So that whatever we put on these machines limits another aspect of whether you want to call it my right to say something or my right to write something. And that's a world that I find very confining. That's a world that I find a bit shocking, in fact. And it's not the kind of world that I associate with freedom. I'm sorry. But if an iPhone or a BlackBerry is going to put me into an environment in which you know, part of my freedom is destroyed. I'm not entirely sure I want to buy into that. So what I'm saying to you is, yeah, the robots are coming, but I want you to think about it and think about the costs of it. Now, this has very significant meaning in terms of politics, too, because look at Israel's Iron Dome, the protection that is supposed to keep them from, you know, being hit with all of these missiles that are floating around the Middle East. In fact, the Iron Dome failed in the last big conflagration that they had in the Middle East and scared Israel to death, because they're not particularly worried about what's going on next door in Palestine. What they're particularly worried about is what's going on next door in Iran. And so you see, if the Iron Dome defensive system breaks down there, what's going to happen when Iran gets going at it? All of these things have what I would call psychological impact on being human. And they have an impact on us as humans in terms of definition of who we are as people, what we understand freedom to be, what we understand humanity to be. So, I don't need to tell you that there's a huge controversy in the United States and around the world about these drones. I think you've probably read enough in the news to know that Obama has been, you know, one of the worst users of drones in the history of the United States. And he's not used unmanned ones, he's used manned ones. So I want you to think about down the line then, when Canada gets its own drone system and Russia gets its drone system and then China gets its drone system, that's not that far away. We're talking, yeah, we're talking in a few years' time. Not only that, but you'll eventually be able to buy a drone. You know, you can in fact buy a drone. And probably what we are going to see now, in not too distant future, is 10,000 drones flying around the country. As you can see, there are over 30,000 drones now unmanned in the United States, flying over various parts of the states and doing various kinds of intelligence gathering things. All of that stuff goes on. And not only, obviously, it's good stuff, right? We've got border patrol going on, and we've got forest fire location going on. We've got downed planes going on, surveillance, and all of that kind of stuff. And so there's all kinds of really good stuff, but I want you to see that by buying into that good stuff on the drone side, we're also buying into a loss of freedom. Now let's talk about medicine. Let's talk about the other side of this issue. I was absolutely floored to learn about what Singapore National University's researchers had done. And they were having crab for dinner one night, right? They were having crab for dinner in Singapore, and one guy said to the other, you know what? We've got a real serious problem with cancer, right? Gastric cancer is a really big problem, especially in East Asia. It is really an immense problem. He said, you know, why don't we try to create a little robot crab that we can send into somebody's stomach and nip those tumors in the stomach. And that's not invasive. That's not going to, you know, we don't have to cut them open and with all of the, you know, the problems that develop when you do this kind of surgery. So they did. They developed this little crab that's handled by at a console that crawls into the person's stomach, nips away at those tumors, destroys them, and then walks out again. Absolutely fantastic. That's only the beginning, because we are now working on little robots that can go all over your body and do all kinds of things. It's a very important thing to know that at this point in time, people who are going into surgery better look over their shoulder because the robots are coming. And maybe a robot does a better job of surgery and handling cases like this than conventional surgery does. So in effect then, there's all kinds of things that are being now explored from the perspective of the robot. Okay, I don't want to belabor that anymore. So I've tried to distill this all down into a kind of debate for you. Okay, so here's your debate. And when you go home to talk to your mom or your dad or your wife, you know, say, okay, let's debate this issue. Even if a super robot were to control all medical systems in the future, with unlimited possibilities to manipulate the human, so long as the word human applies, there must be the presumption of an ethical awareness, an available intentionality to express self meaningfully, and some sense of legitimate choice. Now, as you sit here, some of the choices have been taken away. Your freedom to express what you want in an email, for example, which you think is absolutely private, is no longer private at all. So, in effect, choice is already starting to be questioned at many different levels in our society. And here is the issue that I see when it comes to medical activity, too. Who will decide, then, whether something should be done or should not be done? If we say to a machine, what do you think the problem is with me and what should be done? Would you challenge the machine? Well, here's the pro side of that. And this, I take it, is a position that most of you would want to argue for. X is better for humans has relevance. If so, then ethical evaluation will always define the human. In other words, we can't can ethics and still claim to be human. Even if you argue for some kind of fuzzy logic like Ziad does, we still have to have no means of relating to entities who do not exhibit the minimal elements noted above. We cannot create a robot that will not be tuned to our ethical sensibility. And if we do, we have destroyed what humans have created. There is no way for us to relate to some kind of a machine that is beyond our ability to evaluate it from an ethical perspective. All right, let's take up some of the cons. That is singularity, the date when machines and humans interface to such a point where there is no differentiation between them. When that moment comes, that will change the whole definition of what it is to be human. That is, the human as we are trying to define it now with ethical capability may not, in fact, even apply at that moment. B, the line is blurring between the machine and the human. I've already talked about you know, the machine landing you in a snowstorm. Most current technology is already beyond the intelligence of most human beings. I mean, I don't know for the life of me how an iPhone works. Oh, I have some vague idea, but if you ask me the specifics of how this thing works, I don't even bother with it. You know, I can't be bothered trying to figure out why it works that way. Sure, some human knows, some humans create it. But the issue that I'm trying to wrestle with here is, are we satisfied in creating an intelligent system that is beyond the confines of what we now define as human? And it seems to me that if you argue, yes, we are, then you're going to raise huge ethical issues for those who are not willing to go along with that. The other con side of this is that no human institution now controls these things. Like, who gave the CIA permission to eavesdrop on your Gmail account? Who gave that permission to the CIA? Did the US government? I mean, did you? Did the Canadian government? In the Faculty of Medicine, one of the reasons why we didn't want to go to Gmail was precisely that we argued that Gmail is not monitored in Ottawa, it's monitored in Washington. And that, in our view, reduces not only the sense of being Canadian, but it reduces the sense of independence of this university. Well, maybe I'm a Luddite, but I think that's important. And then I think we're going to have to deal with the whole issue of whether machines can do everything better or not. I don't believe that, but many people do. And it's an issue that we have to wrestle with as singularity comes closer and closer to us. All right, so here are some of the ethical issues that your generation will have to deal with. So we can develop robots to do all of these things now, okay? Should we develop robots that are sensitive to human values? In other words, should we put limits on the way in which intelligence and robotic development is enhanced in such a way that it is always sensitive to human values? In other words, can we build into a robot an ethical perception? The second issue that your generation will have to deal with is, well, what do you do with humans then when the machines have taken over? That is, you know, when we have a machine that will set all this paraphernalia up and shoot the lecture, and, you know, Buddy will have to go off and have a beer someplace. Okay? How many people can you go off and have a beer and still maintain the kind of economy that we have? We have no idea how to handle that. So what are you going to do with 1.2 million Chinese folk who put your iPhone together and no longer have a job? What are you going to do with them? Just, you know, say, I'm sorry, go on home? Amazing. So can we build a robot with interpersonal skills? One of the things I've learned as I've aged is that, you know, in order to make a system work, you have to have really good interpersonal skills. Now, in order to make a university work, you have to have interpersonal skills. In order to make departments work, in order to make medicine work, you've got to have interpersonal skills. People who do not have good interpersonal skills muck up the system. It's not just a matter of mechanics. So I think if we're going to develop a robot to replace us, we indeed have to develop a robot with interpersonal skills built in. And that's a very complex business. And we haven't yet figured out how to create the human-type brain in a machine. And whether we can or not is another issue. So the other thing I want to throw out to your attention is the fact that we've undergone incredible development in our history. You know, we went from the wheel, the boat, the writing, the telephone, all kinds of things that we've done, all kinds of changes that we've brought. And certainly, we're not the same kind of people that the hunter-gatherers were who lived in this area, 15,000 years ago. Obviously, we have different skills, different kinds of things. But all of these technological things have been defined by the human. And I think the real issue here is whether or not we can move beyond ethical issues in handling machines. Well, let me just skip over this for the moment. The relationship of ethics to current human meaning is critical, but its foundation is really rooted in religion. Of course, it's quite possible that we could develop humans who didn't have any kind of religious sensitivity. But we should, I think, be a little modest about that, because you know what? When I grew up and I was your age, religion never appeared on the front page of the paper, ever. Yeah? It was buried away in the back. If it was buried anywhere, it was away in the back page. I challenge you to look at any newspaper now and not find religion on the front page. What has happened? Everybody said, all of the secularists, all of the intellectuals of the past generation argued that religion is dead. Religion is finished. It's not, man. It's not. And all you have to do is walk in my shoes and you can see how religion has come back and is a very, very critical part in the way in which humans express themselves. Well, my point being that if religion can come back like that, you're not going to be able to bury ethical thinking, because ethical thinking is interrelated to religion in very, very dynamic ways. And we know what possibilities there are then. We can ignore religion. We can develop a whole secular society right from the Renaissance on. We developed a secular society in the West. And look what's on the front page today. The Pope resigns. Hey, I rest my case. Humans then have a depth of perception, a depth of understanding, a depth of who they are-ness that cannot be reduced to a kind of causal nexus. And so therefore, I argue that so long as the human is in this equation, ethics has to have a role. Now, I want to walk you through some of the big studies, I'm not up here preaching a sermon. I want to walk you through some of the studies and let you see what I have found as I've looked into this issue. Okay? So here are some of the books and some of the writings that I think are important for you to look at. There's Horner's book, there's Ray's book. You should look at Bill Joy's book, and you certainly should look at what Richard Mason has to say. Okay, so let me walk you through these things and see if we can unpack some of the issues that are resting in these important studies that talk about singularity in the future. So Horner argues then that what we're not talking about is just a matter of medicine that will help people, but in effect what we're looking at is a treatment that will improve performance. We already have some things that do that now. And obviously, if you in a certain point have to face, you know, coming up in front of this class and making a presentation, and you have never done it in your life before, and if all you had to do was to get a little, you know, implant here that could deliver everything that you want to say precisely and beautifully and with great aplomb and great sophistication and, you know, just wow Kim right out of his seat, then you're going to do it, right? That's where we're at here, gang. Okay. So are we going to do that with everything in life? Is that, in effect, where we're going to go? His second point is that a forecast may only be properly made if it is made on the basis of sufficient knowledge, experience, and evidence. If the outcomes are beyond our knowledge and control, then we can't be held responsible for them. But it is a central plank of moral theory that moral agency and judgment must be immune to luck. So as a consequence, then, we have to develop what he calls a nanoethics. Ethics at the atom level, if you will. Now, one of the critical issues about developing a nanoethics is that we do not know the structures of this nano world. And we are, in effect, you know, just starting out in this field. And judging from our scientific progress in the past, we would have to argue that, like every other kind of scientific development, when you start out on a path, you're not sure that you're going to be able to finish it. That is, there's been lots of dead ends in science, as you well know. So the real issue in nanotechnology and nanoscience is, you know, how many dead ends will we run into before we find a way through all of this maze? So in effect, what I'm saying is that the ethical dimension of nanotechnology is something that still requires the imagination and the ethical content of the human. So in effect, then, this is a critical issue in developing a nanotechnology. But I say it rests upon the foundation of humans' ability to judge what is better, what is best, what is related to human development, and what is not. All right, so let's talk about Ray Kurzweil. Human life will be irreversibly transformed. Although neither utopian nor dystopian, the epic will transform the concepts we rely on to give meaning to our lives, from our business models to the cycle of human life, including death itself. So there will be no distinction post-singularity between human and machine, or between physical and virtual reality. Now, I see all kinds of ethical issues in that statement, and a number of things that I think we have to wrestle with. Let me talk about a few of them, if you will. From my perspective, when we talk about no distinction between human and machine, either the assumption is that the machine is going to become human, or the human is going to become machine. In effect, I don't think, judging from my understanding of human history, that the humans are going to give up the field. I just don't see that humans are going to give up the field to any machine anytime soon. So if we talk about the interface between humans and machines, you know, becoming so blurred that we can't make that distinction, I still think it is the human that is going to call the shots. In effect, then, are we at any time ever going to give to the machine the right and the authority to say, you will not exist, or you will not exist in the form that you want. You will exist in a form that we will shape for you. So, in effect then, when singularity comes, and of course Kim and I have been round and round the tree on this one, so when singularity comes, if there is no distinction between human and machine, I don't understand the language. I don't understand the language of machine, I don't understand the language of human. Because as I understand this whole development of singularity, it is a human enterprise. And it is developed out of human imagination and human interest and human construction. And if there is a time when the machines say, well, you will exist or you will not exist, then I'm out of here. You know, that's not my game. So whatever singularity will have to do, it will have to convince me that that environment is entirely human and that I can survive there with the kind of interests that I have. Or take this one, 6 historical epochs that are driven in a law-like manner by the exponential growth of information and technology. I mean, I know this is a law, according to Kurzweil, but I don't see it. In human development, things grow and some of them stop. Other things take off and are, you know, for a while faddish, and then they disappear. Back when I was a kid, you know, we thought the hula hoop would be around forever. You ever know what the hula hoop is? Okay, so I'm not talking into the wind here. Yeah, we thought the hula hoop was going to be with us forever, man. That was really great, especially to go out with your girl or your guy, you know, and you could get the old hips going. It was really fun. Yeah, so we thought it'd be around forever, but well, it was around in a way because we put it into rock music, right? Well, anyway, that's another issue. So, the problem with what we're trying to get a hold of here is the predictability of what is going to happen. And while I appreciate what Ray is trying to do, the predictability to me does not have the kind of law-like reality that he is trying to argue for. And here it is because things, even machines, sometimes work and they sometimes don't. And humans are so independent sometimes that they just don't work the way we think they're going to work. So in effect then, what I rejoice in when I think about humans is the fact that humans don't do what we want them to do all the time. And that humans won't do what machines want them to do all the time. So in effect then, the difficulty is that humans are far more flexible and far more creative and far more imaginative than what we give them credit for. So when it comes to Ray's ideas, I think there's a very interesting problem there. So, the theory of technological evolution as a justification for the shape of future human society. He may be able to see it, but I think there's some very dark clouds on the horizon. So let me look at some of the issues now that Bill Joy raises. So, GNR is going to extinguish, you know, what we now know humans to be. So we go back to Hans Moravec. Biological species almost never survive encounters with superior competitors. It's a very interesting comment, actually, because it raises for me a fundamental structure about science. Because science, you see, is based upon what I would call continuous, regulated memory. Science has to have a memory in order to argue that this happened, and if we do the same thing again, it will happen again. And if we do the same thing again, it will happen again. So in effect then, science is based upon a concept of continuous, similar structure of memory. And if you argue that this kind of regularity is not going to apply in the future, then I find it very interesting to argue then that we're going to be able to genetically change humans in such a way that this law will not necessarily have to apply. The fact is then that that's going to change science dramatically. And of course, as far as I can see, scientific ideas are part of the basis of the way in which we are developing machines. All right. 21st century technologies are widely within the reach of individuals or small groups. The knowledge alone will enable the use of them. That is, knowledge-enabled mass destruction. So maybe this brings us to the cusp of the matter, huh? If you're not satisfied with the way humans are taking the world, would you destroy it? Would you destroy the humans? Would you turn it over to machines? And if in the future, you don't need your body, all you need is your head, we can plug this into a machine and you can continue as long as the machine runs, would you be satisfied with that? So in effect then, is it possible that we could destroy all human life? And would we accept that? And would we allow some machine to make that kind of decision for us? So I think these are big issues. So here we go. Humans are not welcome in the future. It seems far more likely that a robotic existence would not be like a human one in any sense that we understand, and that the robots would in no sense be our children. And on this path, our humanity may well be lost. This is the first moment in the history of our planet when any species, by its voluntary actions, has become a danger to itself. This class developed out of an interest in applying technological understanding to the future in medicine. And yet the motivations for medicine, as far as I have been able to glean, are ameliorative and helpful and assisting to the human. Medicine brings with it a doctrine of care and a doctrine of preservation and an ethical quality that is fundamental to medicine. So in effect then, if we are going to continue on this pathway in which we are ultimately going to destroy the human, I think this raises some fundamental problems for us. And I no longer think then that it's medicine. I think we have a basic issue in the words that we use. Let's talk about Richard Mason. Every aspect of learning or any other feature of the intelligence can in principle be so precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it. Okay, so that's one of the fundamental beliefs of this movement. And you've heard a great deal from other really splendid academics in this course. So the point that I want to make, and the one that Richard Mason is making in his book, is that the machines can in fact replicate you, that in fact it is possible to replicate you in all of your incredible diversity. Now, as far as Mason is concerned, there are a number of issues that have to be wrestled with. And in terms of time, so that we'll have time to debate some of the things that I've raised, I will hurry through some of this. Physically, then, these machines will be silicon-based rather than carbon-based. They will be able to think, feel, have moods, be emotional, interact socially with others, draw on common sense, and have a soul. Thus, AI-based systems will become the next stage in the evolution of life, emerge as our successors, and create a future society populated and governed by computers. Now, if I were a religious person, I would say this is an incredible religious statement. For, in fact, the belief in machines without solid proof of what they can do and what they will not do, I would think this has got all the stuff packed into it that we accuse the Catholic Church and Islam and all the other religions of saying. So in effect then, a good deal of this has to do with a belief system. And while I might not be religious in any sense that you can identify, I find the whole thing rather interesting and bizarre, that we've come to a point where we have to believe in machines. So the question of granting personhood to an AI machine or robot depends on where the line is drawn between persons and inanimate objects. The overarching criteria is displaying some form of cognitive capacity, being conscious, having perceptions, feeling sensations. Well, we've already had machines that seem to be human. And in tests that have been run between ordinary folk judging whether or not a machine shows personal sensitivity or not, we already have that kind of thing. Turing predicted this around the 1950s, that we should be able to develop a machine like that, and in fact, we have. And so it's quite possible then to say that machines will eventually compete with men in all purely intellectual fields. They already do, Big Blue, et cetera, et cetera. So, the central issue then is whether AI can be seen to have moral sensitivity. If we accord machines all of this, what's the fundamental line in the sand that we will, in fact, insist upon for a machine to take over most of these dimensions of our lives? And in this thing, Richard Mason says, moral status is the most compelling ethical issue raised by AI. So for me, the central issue that medicine faces, will it continue its loyalty to the traditions associated with care and assistance and strengthening the human, or will medicine abdicate that and rather turn it over to a complex machine that will decide on the basis of some logarithm that it should do this, that, or the other thing. That seems to be the fundamental issue. So here's some summing up for you, okay? There's no sense of us now saying there's no, we don't have to go the way of the machine. There's no sense in doing that because it's pretty clear that we've already, embraced technology. I mean, just look at the machines in front of you. The second issue that I think you have to wrestle with is the fact that we've not really developed guidelines for developing entities that will be more intelligent than we are. And for you and your generation, from my point of view, your generation will have to wrestle with the fact of whether or not you will allow a machine that is more intelligent than you to define the fundamental parameters of your life. Thirdly, I want to remind you of the fact that humanity as you know it could be destroyed or fundamentally altered by what I would call an unaware and unsystematic understanding of the impact of machines on what we could do to humans. Fourthly, human ethics will have to grapple with any of the outcomes of this widespread application of technology. And for my money, one of the things that we are not doing well is wrestling with the ethical issues involved in AI and in other kinds of intelligent machines. So what I throw out to you is, can you develop a higher ethic, a nano-ethic? Can you develop an ethic that will be programmed into all of these machines? And just so that you don't think I have any sense of humor, here's a final word of wisdom for you. You have to tell Kim that when we get together the next time, he has to bring one of these wine bottle openers. All right, here's some bibliography for you. Have you downloaded this, by the way? Yeah? Okay. So if you want to throw brickbats at me, or you want to, pass me over to the CIA, help yourself. So I want to talk to you out here, and I want to discuss some of the things I've had to say.
Okay.
Thank you for the great talk.
Thank you.
I would like to give my reasons why I raised up my hand when you told
Yes.
why.
Oh,
why
okay. Yeah.
You,
You better. We're going to report you to the CIA.
If your question was, do you agree or is it ethical to replace human with robots, 1.2 million of them?
Right.
I wouldn't probably raise my hand. But you put over there in China, we have, I don't know if you remember on Halloween decoration, the letter which came, or the obligatory work camps over there with the prisoners for political reasons over there. I think it is much more ethical to replace workers that we don't know in which situation they are working with machines, rather than torturing them, giving them nothing, and think that it is ethical.
Touché. Good point. I don't know exactly what's going to happen to this 1.2 million that are no longer utilized in making iPhones. I don't obviously know. You see, this is an issue that's larger than China, as you probably realize. Because I think, if I may be so bold, you guys are the next Chinese. In fact, there are now discussions about abandoning universities entirely because they really aren't cranking out people who will have jobs. So I don't know if you've seen the furor out of Ontario that's about education students. Have you seen that? Yeah. So Ontario cranks out 10,000 students for teaching every year. The absolute max amount of students that can get a job is 4,200. And even if you get rid of old guys in the system like me who keep coming back, even if you get rid of all of those guys, that's still only about 6,200 positions. And so almost a third, maybe a quarter of the graduates in education in Ontario are going to be what? Driving cabs? What are they going to be doing? Now, you know, a few years ago, we shut down medical schools. You remember this, Kim? We cut enrollment in medical school because the government said we've got too many doctors. Too many doctors coming on side. We don't need all these doctors, and so we're not going to put money into the university to train them. So I hate to be so blunt, but you guys are the next wave of this. And I think you're going to have to deal with it personally and existentially. If a machine is going to take over all your work, you know, I don't care what you're doing. If you're doing, you know, economic analysis for Wall Street or what you're doing, if a machine can take over your work, then why are you here? So I'm talking really gut stuff here, right? I'm saying to you that if machines in effect are going to replace us, then we're going to have to think of a generation that will not have anything to do. So what will we do with them? I mean, will we just give them an allowance to buy their beer and go, you know, go home and watch the boob tube? Is that what we're going to do with these people? I mean, this is a real thing. We got to have jobs for people. They've got to do something worthwhile in society. That's the way that we have constructed a society. Can we construct a society that doesn't have jobs, that doesn't have anything for you to do? God help you if you have to spend the rest of your life staring at a screen. You know?
It's all about possibilities, I guess. Possibilities of interestingness. How interesting can jobs get? How interesting can we be? So there's no harm in 1.2 million losing a job that they hate and makes them suicidal if they can find an even better job. And there's no problem with any of us not having a conventional old-fashioned job if we have a much better, much more interesting job. The problem with this much better, much more interesting job is it probably requires a much better, much more interesting person. And are we much better, much more interesting people? There's probably a limit to that. And so there are a lot of people who would be highly challenged if they need to make themselves interesting enough to take one of these very interesting jobs that will replace the jobs that we're losing. And then how many of those very interesting jobs are there going to be? Well, I think in the short term, there will be the potential for some people of losing a relatively dull, mundane job for which there is a past precedent and having a really exciting job that nobody ever had such a job before in the world, and you're really doing it well, and that's all fine. But what fraction of human beings are going to be able to do that?
Yeah, look, Kim, right now, you know, fast foods are a fad, right? Everybody's into fast foods. But there's no need for us to hire these kids off the street, right? I mean, the fact is that we could run most McDonald's and we could run, you know, Tim Hortons by robots. There's just no need for us to hire these. But where did all of the jobs come from that was created in Canada? Okay? I mean, this is the real world we're dealing with, Ralph. Yeah?
So if you take that, I guess eating there is maybe amongst some people fashionable. You know, Leonard Cohen likes to eat at McDonald's. So other people like that. Now, why would you like why would you like to eat at a particular place? Well, suppose that you're into humans doing things. You know, it's a world where humans are doing fewer and fewer things, and you like that restaurant because actually everything produced there is made by a human being, and you like that. So for a while, that could be a fashionable thing. You have some restaurants where machines are doing the cooking, and maybe the food is better, but the nuance, the kind of feeling you get inside may be for a while better if you go to a restaurant where humans are actually creating the food. So you can imagine that in the short term, things could go either way, and there might be a period where your job's more interesting, where the restaurants are more interesting, maybe if you're lucky. But in the long run, it's hard to think that you're not right. You are right. You're going to need many fewer jobs, so we'll be paying people to be on permanent vacation. And depending upon how intrinsically lazy you are, that may sound wonderful, or it may be your worst nightmare, you know? So that probably is a reality.
Well, there's a trend that I think is very apropos of this discussion, and that's the trend to buying from Amazon and online. And what this is obviously going to do is to ruin the mall. I mean, you know, the big malls like West Edmonton will be a shell because people are buying online. In fact, women are buying clothes online, and that for me is the ultimate kicker, you know? I mean, I've accompanied a number of women, you know, in shopping malls, and I know that this kind of procedure is endemic to a certain species among us. And once that goes, you know, I think the whole mall thing is kaput. I think one of the problems and what makes us human is precisely the fact that we can, you know, we can blow it. Sometimes we do things that we know darn well that's not the best thing for me to do, but I'm just going to do it anyway, right? Like every time you have a big fat steak, you know, if you've read the nutritions, right, you say, well, you know, maybe I shouldn't be doing that. My heart and all that stuff, right?
One of the things that's appealing about the Sony Aibo robotic dog is it's programmed to fail like, I don't know, 2 times out of 9, something like that. So for instance, when it picks up that red bone, it'd be really boring if it always did it absolutely correct. And it could do that, right? It could always do it the same, so it's always successful. But you as a human being would not find that appealing. You're sort of rooting for the dog when it fails sometimes. So in fact, strangely, humans find failure and lack of predictability and the kind of background chaos. You remember Ray Kurzweil points out that exponential curve, what's behind it is the most enormous chaos you can imagine, and then it kind of all evens out and you get the straight curve.
Well, you hope so.
But you've got the most enormous stupidity, brilliance, companies failing, companies succeeding, all that sort of evens out to give you a smooth curve. But could we have a life where actually the robotic dogs don't make mistakes anymore. They always get the bone. Wouldn't that be a terrible
I
life?
think that'd be awful. Absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's what makes humans, is the possibility and, in fact, the almost essentialness of error and goofing things up and blowing it. And
Yeah. Well, you know, Osmer Zan couldn't be here today, so I'm going to speak for him.
You got
if
a
one
question
can
from Osmer?
do that. But anyway, he felt that we should teach ethics to machines, and they would then get better at it than we are.
I don't believe that. I
Yeah.
mean, you tell Osmer that when you see him, okay?
Well, we have you on tape, actually, you know, debating him before. But no, I know that you don't believe it. But the same way that a robotic dog can perfectly pick up a bone every time, the things that are quasi-ethics, that are maybe simplified ethics, or, you know, ethics for dummies or something, obviously, the machines could learn how to do those basic things very well. But then is there existential risk in there that by being too ethical, they would kill us all off or something? I don't know. But,
well, I mean, all I have to do is look at my wife and how we make pasta, right?
Right.
And she says I do a lousy job of it. I just say, look, if you sit down and enjoy it, what difference does it make that it's al dente, you know, 1.5 seconds longer than what she thinks? So who's going to program this machine, my wife or me?
Yes.
Okay, that's going to make the pasta.
Yeah. We need more diversity here.
I personally agree with you because, like, who's to say what's right and what's wrong in like terms of programming it? So, like, that's all I really want to say. And I kind of agree with Earle in terms of
anyway,
like,
go ahead, man. Let me have it. What were
no,
you
I
gonna
say I agree with you. Like, the
Yeah,
singularity,
but
in
you
my
can't
opinion, is
agree
going to
with
be
everything
bad.
I say. Come on now.
I'm not. I'm disagreeing with Kim right now. You have like a perfect image of the world with technology, and I don't think that's how it's going to work, really. Because, I mean, what's the point of having us around if humans can do, or robots can do everything way better, efficiently? I mean, all we do is like produce waste, if you think about it, if we're not doing anything in the future. So, if robots were to have ethics or something, in terms of like the overall planet, why would they keep us around? Like, we're just kind of bottom feeding.
So you have to answer that, Kim.
Yeah, well, I think we're assuming simplicity and something that's more enormously complicated than anything we've ever considered before. I mean, don't you think, first of all, the robots, their intelligence won't necessarily be like ours at all. Their reasoning won't be like ours at all. So the way in which they make decisions will be like nothing we've ever encountered in our own heads. And it's not simple. It's like not the first sentient machine will say, I learned that the first question was, am I going to wipe out mankind or not? I don't think that's going to be it. I think it's going to be gradual. There are going to be many other important questions. We don't know what they're going to be. It's going to be just enormously complicated what happens.
I mean, I think one of the interesting things for me is that we're going to have machines that drive the car, right? I mean, so when I go to cross the street, you know, like my chair said to me the other day, for goodness sake, watch the buses when you're crossing the street because, you know, we need your publications. So, I mean, it's going to be great, you know, and we have machines that will sense that I want to cross the street and put the brakes on. You know, my problem is, what if the machine fails? Yeah? And that's my same problem with not having a pilot up there, you know, driving the plane. I mean, drones go down. So that means, you know, the guy on the ground that's operating the joystick, you know, maybe he's maybe he doesn't have everything right. So, Doubting Thomas.
I think it's probably important to realize also that we're only arguing from one perspective of the ethical dilemma. And this is a Western perspective. This is may even more specifically be a Canadian Western perspective. And so there's, you know, we're arguing like there's ethics comes from one perspective, and then, you know, robots will find their own way. Whereas, you know, there might be 20, 30, 40, an infinite amount of perspectives on what is right and wrong. I think that's probably an important.
So an ethical perspective is Canadian?
No. I'm just saying that what we you know, if you go to an ethics board here,
yeah.
And they discuss what they deem as being ethical, maybe that's different to what they
Yeah,
discuss
but
as being.
honest, man, that's not my argument. My argument is that, you know, the muddier we are with ethics, the more human we are. And so you could be British, you could be African, you could be Canadian. We're not going to agree on much of anything, right? And I think that's the beauty of being human. I could say, no, I don't like that. I don't think that's important. If you were a machine, I couldn't. Okay, so I don't think that's Canadian. I think it's human. Yeah. All right, are we done?
So we're out of time. Thank you very much for
Thank you.
very lively debate.